So in the Dharaka forest, the rishis or the ascetics believed that by doing rituals, they would attain liberation. So to correct this, Lord Shiva appeared with Parvati, his Shakti. They appeared as wandering ascetics, and they taught them that true freedom comes from self-realization and not from just actions. Centuries later, Muruganar was a Tamil poet and he wanted to retell this legend, but he believed that only his guru, who was Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharishi, would be able to do justice to this. And in response to this, Sri Ramana Maharishi wrote the Upadēśa Undiyar. This later got translated to Sanskrit as Upadēśa Sāram, the essence of instructions. In this text, he talks about selfless action, devotion, and meditation, which was Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Dhyan Yoga. And he led seekers towards Atma-vichara or self-enquiry, which was the realization of your own true self. Welcome to another episode of Wellness Curated. This is our series, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Living. And as you know, we're talking about sacred texts, timeless wisdom. And today we're going to discuss the Upadēśa Sāram and its timeless relevance. And for that, we have someone incredible today. We have Michael James, who is a practitioner and a scholar of Ramana Maharishi's teachings. And in 1976, he went and spent 2 decades at the ashram, at Ramana Maharishi's ashram in Tiruvannamalai. And he studied under the influence of Sri Sadhu Om. He's translated and authored a whole load of books from Ramana Maharishi, including Happiness and the Art of Being. And he's responsible for globally spreading this word. And we're delighted to have you here, Michael. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Michael, I first want you to tell us, how did you get involved with Ramana Maharishi's teachings, sitting where you are?
I can say it in one word, his grace.
Lovely.
By his grace, at a very young age, I was drawn to India, and while traveling around India, I heard about Bhagavan. I came to Tiruvannamalai, and as soon as I read, the first work of Bhagavan's that I read was an English translation of Nana, Who Am I? And as soon as I read that, I knew this is what I was looking for.
Wonderful.
It's all his grace only.
That's true. That's very true. Now tell me, we're going to delve a little bit into the Upadēśa Sāram today.
Yes.
Can you explain to me the core of it and why is it relevant today?
Okay. To understand the core of it, we need to understand that it's an integral part of Bhagavan's teachings. It's one of the central works of Bhagavan's teachings. And Bhagavan's teachings are all a coherent whole. So we need to understand the core teachings of the core message of Bhagavan's teachings. It can be expressed in various ways. We can express it from the perspective of being, Sat, awareness, Chit, or happiness, Ananda. So I'll take from the perspective of Ananda. That is, Bhagavan has revealed that our real nature is infinite happiness. And we are all, happiness is what we are all seeking. Because having risen as ego and identified ourselves as a person, we have limited ourselves. So as this finite being that we now take ourselves to be, we cannot experience the infinite happiness that we actually are. But nothing less than infinite happiness will satisfy us. So dissatisfaction is the very nature of a jiva or soul, ego. as Ramakrishna Paramahamsa very beautifully said, the fact that we are all dissatisfied and that nothing can satisfy us itself shows that our real nature is Brahman. Brahman is the infinite whole. So nothing less than the infinite can satisfy us. So because we have limited ourselves, we seem to be lacking happiness. And because the happiness seems to be lacking in ourselves, we naturally look for happiness outside. We think if we have money, if we have possessions, if we have kind and loving friends and relatives, if we have name and fame or learning, or we are all seeking happiness in so many different ways, but we're all seeking happiness outside ourselves. This is the reason why we will never find satisfaction. Even people who have, nowadays there are people who have hundreds of billions of dollars, but they're not satisfied. They want more and more and more. So dissatisfaction is the very nature of being a jiva, being an individual soul. We are inherently dissatisfied because nothing short of infinite happiness will satisfy us. So infinite happiness is our own being, is what we actually are. So the central message of Upadēśa India is that we cannot attain happiness by any amount of actions, but only by being as we actually are. So long as we're looking for happiness outside ourselves, we have to do something to acquire this, to acquire friends and relatives and wealth and essential pleasures, all these things. We're doing, hoping to acquire something. And we're not only looking for things in this world, we also want to, in the next world also. That's what most religions are concerned with, happiness not only in this world, but in the hereafter. The sages in the Dwaraka forest, they were not actually seeking liberation. They were essentially seeking artha and karma. That is, they were seeking material prosperity and sensual pleasures, both in this world and in the world to come. They believed if they do these Vedic rituals, if they abide by the Dharma, they will attain all the wealth and pleasures that they seek in this world and in the world to come. So that was their aim. But they suffered from, they were so proud of their own actions, their own ritual actions. They believe there's no God except karma, except their ritual actions. So if they do these ritual actions correctly, they will get everything that they want. That is why Lord Shiva appeared in the forest to set them on the right path. He didn't actually appear with Shakti, he appeared with Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu often accompanied Shiva in the form of Mohini, a beautiful enchantress.
Oh, that's interesting, because where I had read it, it said he appeared with Parvati, with Shakti. So that's interesting that you're saying he appeared with Mahavishnu in Mohini form.
Yeah. In many Puranic stories, Lord Vishnu appears as Mohini. And in some Puranic stories, Shakti is the sister of Vishnu. Okay, so there's a link, but ultimately all are one. Ultimately, it's
all one energy. Yes.
But all these stories, they all illustrate certain tattvas, certain very deep principles. So anyway, the teachings that were given by Lord Shiva, since Bhagavan Ramana is Arunachala Shiva himself, Murugan took this opportunity to tell this story and to ask Bhagavan Ramana to write summarize the teachings given by Lord Shiva. So the essence of the teachings, this Upadēśa Sāram, is that happiness is attained not by doing, but by being. What that means is explained in the text very beautifully. And
Lovely.
but this text also includes, Bhagavan shows how all types of spiritual practices ultimately lead to this ultimate practice of Atma-vichara,
Yes, which is
which is itself complete.
self-inquiry.
It's self-inquiry, self-investigation, but it is
Yeah.
also self-surrender.
It's also self-surrender.
Because
That's
by
true. And what you're telling me about infinite happiness and self-inquiry, to me, it's what I've studied in the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita as well. At the end of the
exactly.
day, like you're saying, a lot of our religious practices come down to this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is the essence of a lot of religions, correct?
Exactly.
So, Michael, I want to ask you about Karma Yoga.
Yes,
Now, in the Upadēśa Sāram, he says that that itself will not lead to liberation, right?
yes.
But when I put it in the context of today, and I keep coming back to today because
Yes.
that's what I want people to understand. How are these things relevant today?
Right.
You know, a lot of times you hear youngsters saying, oh, this was from then. You
Yeah.
know, so I want you to talk to us in the context of achievements, productivity, competition. How does karma yoga work in these contexts?
Right.
And how can we give life a deeper meaning
Right.
using Upadēśa Sāram
Yes.
guidelines?
That is concerning relevance today. We are not so much unlike those Dharakavana rishis. We too are seeking happiness outside ourselves. We are seeking through actions. They were seeking through ritual actions. Nowadays we seek by getting educated, getting jobs, becoming doctors, engineers, business people. But it's all essentially the same. We are looking for happiness outside ourselves, and we believe that by doing this or that, we will achieve what we want. So this is the mistake we are all making. We are all seeking happiness, but we, as I said, we believe that happiness is something that we will acquire by acquiring more possessions or more friends or more relatives or more name and fame or more learning or more this or more that. Actually, happiness is our own real nature. So we don't depend on anything other than ourselves for happiness. So long as we seek happiness outside ourselves, we're going to be disappointed. Even whatever we may achieve in this life, even if we become the wealthiest person in the world or the most famous person in the world or the most learned person in the world or whatever it is, however much we achieve, we know this life is temporary. We're only here for a few years. We dance around, achieve this and that, and one day we're all going to go. We can't find the satisfaction the infinite and eternal satisfaction we're seeking in this material life. But we have an opportunity to seek that happiness within ourselves. So if we want to find real meaning in life, meaning that extends beyond the small time frame of the life of this body, we need to seek that happiness within ourselves. That is what this Upadēśa Sāram is all about. So what Bhagavan says at the beginning, in verse 2, he says that fruit of action is transient. It passes away. Palamasaswatam, he says in the Sanskrit version. But that is when we do an action, as a result of that action, there'll be a certain fruit. But that fruit is just like we can't eat the same mango twice. Once you've eaten the mango, it's finished. But what remains is the seed. That the seed of a vasanas, that is the inclination to do the same type of actions again. So it's the seeds, the vasanas, that make us fall in the great ocean of action. That's what he calls kriti mahodado patanakaranam, the cause for falling in this great ocean of action. So he concludes by saying, in Tamil he says, vidu tarele, that the action will not give liberation. In the Sanskrit he says even more emphatically, gati nirodhakam, it will obstruct liberation. So doing action is not the way to liberation. However, he goes on in the next verse, verse 3, to say, if action is done nishkamya, that means without desire for the fruit, but done, in Tamil he says, kartanukakam, done for God. That means done for the love of God. In Sanskrit, he says, Ishwarapitam, offered to God. So if we are acting not motivated by desire for some result, but just for the love of God, that will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. So,
wonderful.
So by acting, this is karma yoga, but Bhagavan doesn't separate karma yoga from bhakti.
Bhakti yoga, exactly.
He shows the essential link between them, which is also very clearly implied by Krishna in so many ways in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So they are not two separate paths. Actually, if we understand Upadēśa Sāram correctly, what Bhagavan is teaching us is that the preliminary stages of the path of bhakti are karma yoga. That is, he says in the next verse, in the fourth verse, we have three instruments of action: mind, speech, and body. And puja, japa, and dhyana are actions of mind, speech, and body. And in this order, each is more efficacious than the previous one.
So he's even taken dhyan into karma yoga.
Yes, because it's an action of the mind. It's an action of the mind.
Okay.
But when he said that each is more efficacious than the previous one, what he means is it's more effective in purifying the mind. So if we do actions by body, doing ritual worship, for example, that will purify the mind if it is done for the love of God and not. Many people do puja in order to get this or that from God. That is not the true bhakti. The true bhakti is when we are worshipping God just for the love of God, not because of what we can get from God, but because we love God. So that will purify the mind. But more efficacious is japa, which is done by speech. And more efficacious is dhyana, which is done by mind. Efficacious in purifying the mind, that is. And then in the next verse, he gives a very broad definition of puja. He doesn't just limit it to ritual puja. In Shaivism, there's an idea called Ashtamurti. It is said that Shiva has 8 forms. The 8 forms of Shiva are the 5 elements. In other words, everything that constitutes not only the material world, but also the mental world, the basic constituents, and sun, moon, and jiva. Jiva is a living being. So these are the 8 forms of Shiva. This includes everything. So what he says is worship or doing service or worshipping with the idea that all forms are forms of Shiva, are the 8 forms of Shiva. He doesn't mention Shiva. He says 8 forms of God is good worship of God. So that gives a very broad definition of puja. Because, for example, we can, if we see a hungry person or a person who is grieving for, maybe they've been bereaved or something, offering food or offering a kind word, but with the attitude that we are serving God in the form of that person, that is a type of worship. Nowadays, we live in a world with where one of the major problems is climate change. So we know
Right.
that the actions we do have an impact upon the environment. It has an impact upon other people in our environment. It has other animals in our environment. So if we try to act in a way that causes minimum harm,
Mm-hmm.
ahimsa, that is, we can't totally avoid harm.
Mm-hmm.
Just by living, we are causing some harm, but we can minimize the harm we cause. If we are doing that with the attitude that this is all God's creation, this is God has appeared in the form of all these things, and we do it as mentally as a worship of God, that is also good worship of God. So Bhagavan doesn't limit worship just to ritual worship. There's so many ways we can worship God, and it's all good worship of God.
So you're saying to me that action, devotion, and meditation are all on how you actually lead your life every day.
Yes, it's how
Is that
you,
right? It's not
yes,
about sitting down and doing the prayers or doing the meditation, though it could be that
it
as
could be.
well.
It includes that also, but it's not limited to that. That is, our whole life should be worship of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Our
it's
whole life
all,
should be worship of God, and everything should be a meditation.
yes, it's all, but it all depends upon the attitude with which we do it.
But
Suppose
tell
it,
me how can exactly my question now. Tell me how can we do that? You've seen the lives everyone is leading on this planet today.
right,
How can we do it in our everyday lives all the time?
it's very much easier to say it than to do it. But it
Yes.
comes down to what we what we actually value in life. Are we are we just seeking for the gratification of our own desires? If we're seeking the gratification of our own desires, most people who go to temples and churches and mosques and gurudwaras and synagogues and so on, they go because they want something from God.
Mm.
But if we are following the path of a true path of bhakti, we are not seeking anything from God. We whatever we do, we are doing it for the love of God. So
Selfless devotion.
it's a change in our attitude. But for this, it's important to recognize that it's natural for us to desire wealth and sensual pleasures, all these things. These are natural things for us to desire. But we need to recognize these will never satisfy us. And only if we recognize that we cannot get the satisfaction we're seeking from all these things, will we look for something higher, something deeper in meaning. And God, God is not some distant being. God is ever present in our own heart. This is very, very central to Vedanta. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Ahamatma Gudakesha. I am,
Mhm.
he's the, he's the, he's the self in each one of us. He is what we essentially are. He's our
Aham
true self.
Brahmasmi.
Exactly, exactly. I am Brahman. That is, Brahman is that which is always shining in our heart as I. So this also is dealt with in the later verses of Upadēśa. Bhagavan explains this very, very clearly. I'll touch on that a little later. So anyway, as I say, first he talks about puja. Then better than
Mm-hmm.
puja is japa. And he talks
Mm-hmm.
about different types of japa. You can either do it singing hymns aloud, or you can do japa. Better than that is doing japa aloud. Better than doing japa aloud is doing it softly in the mouth. Better than that is doing it mentally. And mental japa is a type of dhyana.
Meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then he
It's a
goes on the next verse about meditation. What he says about meditation is that rather than interrupted meditation, meditation that is uninterrupted, like the flow of a stream or the pouring of ghee, unbroken meditation is better. Why is it better? Because if we, here in this context, meditation, he's referring to meditation on a name or form of God.
Sorry?
On a name or form of God.
Okay.
So if we're meditating on the name or form of God, if our mind is often going away, if other thoughts are often intruding and our mind wanders away towards other things, that means we're more interested in those other things than we are in God. So when the love for God is deep and intense, the meditation on God will be uninterrupted. When the love is not so deep and not so intense, we will often be, our meditation will often be interrupted by other thoughts. That's why he said the uninterrupted meditation is best among all. So this is up to verse 7. He's talked about these three types of action: actions of body, actions of speech, and actions of mind, and shown how these can be means by which we express our love for God.
I want you to explain uninterrupted meditation to us more. What do you mean by that, and how do we do that?
Well, if we let's say we meditate on the name of God. Supposing we meditate on um, um, Rama, 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 Rama,
Mhm.
Rama. While we're meditating, we may be the mind may mechanically go on thinking Rama, 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 but actually the attention goes off somewhere else. We start thinking about problem at the office or problem
Mhm.
at home or how we're going to pay the bills or this or that, because our mind is more concerned about these other things. So the aim in meditation is to fix the mind on one thought. So in bhakti meditation, we're fixing the mind on the name or form of God. If we're practicing Ashtanga yoga, we try to fix the mind on some object of meditation, but we're trying to make the mind fixed on that without getting diverted away towards other things.
So, how can you take this meditation that when you sit down in meditation, how can you take that to everyday life, to all our actions?
Okay,
Can we lead a life which is meditation?
yes, you can. For
And how?
example, if you're a bhakta, you've got God has so many different names and forms, but in the path of bhakti, we have what is called Ishtadeva. That's a
Mhm.
particular name and form of God, but particularly appeals to us. So for some people, Krishna is the Ishtadeva. For some people, Rama is the Ishtadeva. Some people, Shiva is the Ishtadeva.
Seriously.
Some people, I mean, for me, Bhagavan Ramana is my Ishtadeva. So the mind naturally gets drawn to that one particular name and form. And meditation isn't just a matter of sitting down with eyes closed. We can be meditating even in the midst of day-to-day activities. Even that is, day-to-day activities require a certain amount of attention. But even when we're doing work that requires a certain amount of attention, so many other thoughts are passing through our mind. For example, supposing we're traveling to work in the morning, we may be driving a car, or we may be going on a bus or train or whatever it
Mhm.
is. Even if we're driving a car, which requires attention, we'll be thinking so many other thoughts because if you're accustomed to driving, the driving almost goes on autopilot. That is,
Right.
we don't. You may every day drive the same route to work. When you arrive at work, will you remember whether there were red lights and such a spot? You won't remember because
Mhm.
you'll give minimum attention to these things. Your mind will be thinking of so many other things. So throughout the day, uh, we can't give an exact percentage, but just for example, maybe 90% of our thoughts are thoughts which are not required for the immediate task at hand. Maybe only 10% of our thoughts are actually required for the task at hand. those other 90%, we can be meditating on God while we are doing these things. So many people, many devotees, they'll continue doing japa, for example, mental japa, throughout the day. Whatever they may be doing, they'll continue repeating the name of God. So meditation shouldn't be limited just to the times when we sit in meditation. It should go on. Our aim should be to go on throughout the day. That's
Which
how the
reminds
mind.
me so much
Yes.
about Zen meditation, where every task is a meditation in itself,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
no matter how mundane.
Yeah. Exactly. But by doing this, we limit the extent to which the mind is wandering away towards so many other things. This is how the mind is purified, because the impurities in the mind are the vasanas. That's or samskaras, as they're also sometimes called. That's the inclinations to attend to this or that. So by fixing our mind on one thing, on a name or form of God, we limit the wandering of the mind, and thereby the mind, those vasanas to think about this and that. Like we all face problems in life. We all probably had times in life when we had difficulty paying the bills or paying the rent or whatever. If we, instead of worrying about all these things, if we think about God and trusting that God will help us to overcome all these difficulties. So rather than dwelling on the difficulties, we allow the mind to dwell on God. The inclination to worry about these things will get less, and the inclination to depend on God will grow more. So this is how the purification takes place. But
Lovely.
up to this point, I've been talking about karma. So that's
Yeah.
up to verse 7. But very important, in verse 8, Bhagavan shows how we switch from action to being. That is, when the mind is sufficiently purified, as he said, when the mind is purified, it will show the way to liberation. That is, in the purified mind, we gain the clarity to understand God is not something other than ourself. God is the infinite whole. If we were something other than God, God would thereby be limited. There would be God and not God. So if anything were other than God, God would be limited. He'd be a finite God. But all religions say God is infinite. So if God is infinite, how can he be something, or how can we be other than him? So
Because he's everywhere.
Yeah, he's everywhere and everything. He's the
In everything.
underlying reality of everything. So he is our own being. As Krishna says, Aham Atma Gudikesha, he's our own Atma, our own very own self. He is what we actually are. So in verse 8, Bhagavan says, rather than Anya Bhava, Anya means what is other. So Anya Bhava means meditating on God as something other than ourselves. When we meditate on a name or form of God, that name or form is something other than ourselves.
Right.
But rather than that Anya Bhava, Ananya Bhava, that is meditation on what is not other, with the understanding that he is I, that is best among all. So here rather than allowing the mind to go out towards the name and form of God, we recognize that God is what is shining in our heart as I. So we meditate on nothing other than I. Why does Bhagavan say this is the best of all? Because this is not an action. When we allow our mind to go outwards, that is an action. Right. That's a mental activity. But when we turn the mind back within to attend to our own being, with the firm conviction that our being is itself God, by attending to our being, the mind subsides back into the being. So in the next verse 9, he says, by the strength of that meditation, in other words, by the strength of that meditation on one's own being in the state of being, which transcends bhavana. Bhavana there means meditation in the form of mental activity. So being in the state of being which transcends mental activity, that is parabhakti tattva. That is the supreme devotion. That's the very
I
nature
see.
of supreme devotion, because that is
Right.
surrender of ourselves to God. Because when we turn our mind within, the mind subsides.
Mhm.
That subsidence of mind is offering ourselves to God, surrendering ourselves to God. So that is the supreme devotion.
So he's basically, what he's done here is combined karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and dhyan yoga and made it all one.
Exactly. Because the that is the um, karma, the preliminary stages of the path of bhakti. We express our love for God through actions of mind, speech, and body. That is
Okay.
karma yoga.
Yes.
But when we recognize that God is our own being, is ever present in our heart as our own Atma, our very own self, and with that understanding, turn our mind lovingly to attend to Him in our own heart, there the action ceases and we subside. That is surrendering ourselves. So he makes it clear that this path of Atma-vichara, which is the path of jnana, is in
Hmm.
fact the pinnacle of the path of bhakti. It's not an alternative path. It's where the culmination of the path of bhakti is surrender. And surrender is achieved by turning our mind within and offering it to God in our own heart.
Okay, so I want to ask you more about Atma-vichara or self-enquiry,
Yeah,
which is at the heart of Sri Ramana Maharishi's teachings.
yes,
And there was this really lovely anecdote about someone going to him and saying, "My mind is full of persistent thoughts." And he said, "To whom do these thoughts arise?" And
right.
which was a really beautiful way of explaining it. And it's something I'm going to use in my life because, when I feel like I've got too much going on,
Yeah,
just to remind myself that I'm not the mind.
yes. What Bhagavan says in that connection, people often think that it's often misinterpreted, that Bhagavan recommended that we ask to whom. But that is not really what he meant. What he said actually is investigate to whom.
Hmm.
Sometimes asking to whom can remind us, but it's not just a matter of asking the question. Investigating to whom means turning our attention away from whatever appears, whatever thoughts come and trouble us, turning our attention away from those thoughts back towards ourself.
Lovely.
Bhagavan,
That's
ha-
lovely.
Bhagavan has defined what he means by Atma-vichara. He says, Sadakalamum manate Atmavil Vaitirabhatu. That is, uh, um, fixing the mind, always keeping the mind on oneself. This is exactly what Krishna teaches in the Gita. In chapter 6, which is the chapter on dhyana yoga, in verse 25, he says, gradually, sane uparamet, gradually, withdraw the mind from activity, bring it to stillness. And he ends that verse by saying, Atma samstam mana kritva na kinchitapi chintayet. Fix the mind on Atma, on oneself, on yourself, and do not think of anything else. That is the path of Atma-vichara that Bhagavan has taught.
Lovely.
So
Now,
the
there
essence
is
of Bhagavan's teachings, Bhagavan Ramana and Bhagavan Krishna are teaching exactly the same.
same thing,
Yeah,
absolutely the same thing. Yeah.
yeah.
I want to ask you about this other very interesting anecdote also that I heard about Sri Ramana Maharishi was that one time he was sitting next to the kitchen fire
Mm,
and his hand went into, like, he put his hand on the fire and he just
mm,
kept it there. So
mm,
one of his devotees said, "You're burning your hand. What are you doing?
mm.
You must be feeling pain." And he said, "Well, my body feels the pain, but I'm not the body."
Yes. I haven't heard that story, but it is true. towards the end of his life, he had sarcoma
Mm-hmm.
on his arm. It was a tumor growing on the nerve.
Mm-hmm.
It's excruciatingly painful. And they operated several times, and the operations were done without anesthesia. So people asked him, Bhagavan, didn't you feel the pain? He said, yes, I felt the pain. It was like if a thousand chilies are crushed and rubbed on the wound. So intense was the pain, but that pain is not other than me.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. That's very powerful,
That is
actually.
why we try to avoid pain and we seek pleasure, because we have likes and dislikes. We dislike naturally, as biological organisms, we are programmed to dislike pain and to like pleasure. But if we go beyond likes and dislikes, nothing can hurt us. Nothing. There's neither. By going beyond likes and dislikes, we go beyond pleasure and pain. That is,
Right,
but if
yes.
we that is possible only when we find the infinite happiness that is our own being. Then only
Right.
will we be able to completely go beyond all likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, fears, and so on. That's
Okay.
why looking for that happiness within our own heart is so important.
Okay. I mean, it's very hard to do. And when you look at the context of what you're saying, I mean, you
Yes,
said he was operated
yes,
without anesthesia.
yes,
Wow. And
yeah,
he could bear it.
yeah, yeah,
That is incredible. But I want to bring it back to what is happening in people's minds today and how distracted people are, how restless people are feeling,
yeah,
and therefore the increase in all the mental health
yes,
issues that people are
yeah,
having. Overactive minds, thanks to the internet. You're in Peru, you're in the US, you're in Canada. At the same time,
yeah,
your
yeah, yeah,
brain is
yes,
everywhere, and we're feeling
yes,
so kind of our heads are ready to burst.
yes.
How does the wisdom of Upadēśa Sāram help us with that? And how will it guide us towards peace and clarity?
That is the all this modern technology. It's constantly feeding our five senses with new sights, new sounds, and all this advertising. Uh, get the latest iPhone, get this, get that. So this is just helping to draw our mind outwards and increase our desires.
Mm-hmm.
Desires are, desire is pain. That is, when we desire something, we desire it because there's something lacking in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So the more desire we have, the more we will feel an emptiness in ourselves. So we're constantly having to try to fill that, but we can never fill it. So understanding that we cannot get the gratification, the satisfaction we are seeking, however many gadgets we get, however much we fill our mind watching this, um, uh, going through social media, watching films, doing this, this doesn't provide satisfaction. We all know this. We all know from experience. But though we experience dissatisfaction, we're like a drug addict. We know it's not good for us, but we go back to it again and again because we know nothing better. Why a drug addict or a drunkard? Why a drunkard drinks alcohol? Why a drug addict takes drugs? It's because of some emptiness in their life. We are taking all this social media and things. We're using it in exactly the same way that a drunkard uses alcohol. We're trying to fill up some inner emptiness. So long as we continue in that way, we will be perpetually dissatisfied. But if we begin to look within, The more we look within, the more we recognize whatever satisfaction we gain from the gratification of our desires is actually the satisfaction that is ever present in our heart. So we don't
Mhm.
need all these things to be happy. I remember when I first went to India, I was very struck by the fact you can go to villages in India. It's a bit different now. Things have changed a lot in the last 50 years. But 50 years ago, in villages, people were living very simple lives.
Yes,
The,
yes.
the, the only possession most people had was a bicycle. Bicycle was
Yeah.
beyond the bicycle, there was nothing really they
No,
could
it's still the
aspire for.
case. That's still the case in a lot of villages.
It may be, yeah, maybe it is. But nowadays everyone has a mobile phone
Hmm.
also. But it was, I mean, things were so simple, but people were happy and contented. Children had big
Yes. And
smiles
you're
on
not
their
the
face.
first person to say that. So
Yeah,
many
yeah,
people notice that.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Whereas if you see children in cities, uh, though they have so many things, they're perpetually dissatisfied because desire is a bottomless pit. However much we try to satisfy our desires, there'll always be more and more desires. So there's a great happiness to be found in a very simple life. So
But then we know that, right?
yes,
But how do we execute that in our lives? We all know that desire is a bottomless pit, that
yes,
this is not good.
yes.
How do we actually practice it?
Well, that is we have desire because we all experience an inner emptiness. The inner emptiness is because of we have separated ourselves from what we actually are. What we actually are is infinite happiness. So long as we limit ourselves as this small person born a few years before and who's going to die a few years ahead, uh, we are limited in time, we're limited in space, we're limited in so many ways. So as this limited being, we cannot, whatever we acquire cannot satisfy us. So if we understand that satisfaction is not to be gained from gratifying desires, satisfaction is to be found only within our own heart. If we it's a journey. We are trying to wean our mind off its outward going inclinations and give it the love to go within. The more we follow this path, the more satisfaction, abiding satisfaction we will find. The things
Right.
that troubled us in the past, they still may trouble us a little, but they trouble us much less. We'll be less concerned about these things. We'll have more confidence that ultimately there's one power of grace that is taking care of everything. The more we subside within, the more we are depending upon that grace, which will take care of everything.
And tell me, Michael, you've spent decades
Yes,
studying
yes,
Sri Ramana Maharishi's
yes.
work. You've been like a beacon of light to spread his work across the globe. What would you say has been your biggest revelation as far as his work is concerned? And what has been your biggest challenge in spreading the work?
Um, I don't really consider that it's my work to spread Bhagavan's teaching. Bhagavan's teachings had their own appeal. People who are drawn to his teachings will be naturally drawn to them. So they, um, we are not missionaries. We're not trying to spread. We're not here to spread these teachings. Bhagavan himself never gave any teachings of his own accord. Only when people asked him did
Mhm.
he give any teachings.
Right.
So we are not here to give these teachings to those who are not interested. Most people are too preoccupied with other things. They're not interested in this. That's okay. The same grace that has brought us to this path will eventually bring everyone in due course. So it's not our mission to propagate these things. But when people ask us, naturally we try to explain what Bhagavan has taught us, what it all means. Some people are able to get it. Some people have a lot of difficulty getting it. But I think one of the major obstacles is people have too many different, people have read too much. They've got too many ideas in their mind. Bhagavan's teachings and the core teachings of Vedanta are extremely simple. Ekameva Advaityam. There's one only without a second. And Tattvamasi, you are that. So it's very, very simple. But our minds are too complicated. So because our minds are complicated, we complicate this simplicity. That's why many people find it difficult to grasp how very simple and clear this actually is. So we need to be ready to set aside our former beliefs and assumptions and question things very deeply and look deep within ourselves in order to see the clarity and simplicity of the truth.
Wonderful, wonderful. That was really wonderful. Can I trouble you to give me your favorite verse, or one that you think is very, very, resonates with you, which you think is very relevant to today from the Upadēśa Sāram?
It is very difficult because there's so many very, very precious gems there. As I say, the essential message of Upadēśa Sāram is that the happiness we are seeking is to be found in our being, not by doing anything, but by just being as we are. And in order to be as we are, we need to turn our attention back within and thereby subside. That's what I was telling you about verses 8 and 9. And 9 is the verse where Bhagavan says, by the strength of that ananya bhava, that inward-looking attention, being in one's own being, that is the supreme devotion. And in the next verse, verse 10, he says, Udita idatil odungi iratil adu karmamum bhaktium undipara adu yogamum jnanamum undipara. That means having subsided in the place from which we rose, in other words, having subsided back into our own being, just being in that place, that itself is karma and bhakti. That means karma yoga and bhakti yoga. It is Ashtanga yoga and it is jnana. It's all of these. So it's just a matter, but this can be achieved very simply only by turning our attention within. But that requires supreme love. That's why Bhagavan never separated the path of jnana from the path of bhakti. Bhagavan often used to say, bhakti is the mother of jnana. Because jnana is the path of turning within and surrendering ourselves completely. In order to surrender ourselves completely, we need to have all-consuming love. So bhakti and jnana are not two different paths. The path of jnana, the path of Atma-vichara, is the culmination of the path of bhakti. It is also the culmination of the path of karma yoga, and also the culmination of the path of Raja Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga.
Okay. Wow. That was wonderful. Thank you, Michael. That was such an enlightening conversation. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us and to teach us about the Upadēśa Sāram today.
You're most welcome.
Take care. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank
That
you.
was lovely. Thank you. And
Okay.
you're clearly very, very knowledgeable. I really enjoyed that conversation.
I know very little, but by Bhagavan's grace, I've been blessed to study his works in depth and answers to all questions. Though he wrote very little, we can find answers to all our questions in what he's written. Either he said it explicitly or it's implicit in his words.
But what really struck me was what you said, that Bhagavan never said anything till he was asked. He
Yes.
didn't just offer his teachings.
No.
And even the Upadēśa Sāram came into being because he was asked by the Tamil poet.
Yes, exactly.
Wonderful.
Exactly.
That in itself is so profound.
Because Bhagavan doesn't see us as we see ourselves. We see ourselves as this finite person with so many problems. He sees us as we actually are. He sees us as himself.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Right. A pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.